Chapter 22. Under the chair, Stephen's feet bounced up and down. They'd been there for almost half an hour, and with each passing minute, he was feeling less and less comfortable. How much longer was this going to take? "Oh, good move! Well played!" Morton's gruff chortle echoed from the row of tables on the far side of the room. Stephen glared in the direction of his colleague, who was involved in an animated game of backgammon with one of the residents. They'd been asked to wait in the recreation room while the nursing home's manager finished a meeting, but it seemed to be taking an inordinate amount of time. "Do you think we should give them a hurry along?" he called out over a sea of white and grey heads. "Calm down," Morton barked before addressing his companion. "They're so impatient nowadays, aren't they?" The backgammon player nodded earnestly. Stephen ignored the jibe, instead getting up and heading out through the double doors and back to the foyer. They were in the middle of a murder investigation. It was hardly the time for games. Still, he admitted to himself as he hit the bell at the reception aggressively. For all his faults, Morton was surprisingly good with the elderly. "Can I help?" A tired-looking woman appeared. "We've been waiting to speak with the manager for some time now." Stephen flipped his badge. "Could I get started by having a look at your security system?" The woman shrugged, leading him through a doorway and out into a small office with no windows. Stephen sighed when he saw the antiquated setup with just one boxy monitor. "Is the footage in colour?" "You're asking the wrong person, dear. But feel free to have a play with it." Finding the remote, Stephen began hunting through the dates that Emmett had sent him. The old system was at least easy to operate. He started with the 10th of July, the day they suspected Rosemary Norman and another person had visited Tom. There she is. Stephen's throat caught as he switched between camera angles to watch a curly-haired woman enter the building, chat with the receptionist, and walk slowly through the maze of hallways, before disappearing through a side door. What a shame we can't see into Tom's room. He fast-forwarded, waiting to see the red-headed woman reappear. Instead, a thin man entered the building, following the corridors and disappearing through the same side door. He and Rosemary were now in Tom's room together. Stephen rewound the footage and squinted at the screen. The combination of the poor quality footage and the fact that the man was wearing a baseball cap made it impossible to see any of the visitor's features clearly. Damn. Eventually, Stephen watched Rosemary leave. The unknown man stayed in Tom's room for hours. Scrolling through days of footage, Stephen continued looking for anyone noteworthy entering or exiting room 26. It was tedious work, with so many carers and staff members coming and going, and the grainy black and white vision began blurring in front of him. Hang on. He stopped the footage abruptly. Were his eyes playing tricks on him? Stephen sat up straighter. It had only been the quickest of flashes, but he was certain he'd seen the man in the baseball cap again. He rewound slowly. Yes, there he was. Wearing the same hat, the man scampered up the corridor, his movements somewhat jerky and irregular, and disappeared off to the left of the screen. Stephen checked the date and time. It was 11:20 a.m. on Tuesday, the 16th of July, Tom Norman's birthday. How odd. He flicked through the copies of the visitor book. No one, aside from Daniel Norman, had signed in to see Tom that day. Taking a slow breath, Stephen began shifting between camera angles to replay the visitor's movements, from his hurried entrance to the building to the long visit with Tom. He couldn't quite say why, but there was something unnerving about the man in the baseball cap. She's still not answering my calls. I've tried everyone I can think of. I don't know what to do. Emmett frowned, his eyes darting between the entrance to Chino's cafe and the school teacher sitting miserably across from him. He'd been hoping that this case would resolve itself, but since it hadn't, he had little choice but to pass it on. I appreciate how hard this is for you, Mr. Peters. He nudged his coffee cup away. And as I explained on the phone, in the absence of any developments, I think it's best we escalate the investigation. That's why I've asked one of my trusted colleagues to take this over. You can't help? I had one of my detectives make some preliminary inquiries yesterday. Emmett watched Owen fidget with his hands in his lap. We were able to establish that Charlotte left Westside Health at 9:56 a.m. on Friday morning. The next step will be finding surveillance footage around the area to map her steps from there. Unfortunately, my team has stretched the limit with ongoing cases, and I want you to have the best resources possible. The teacher blinked rapidly. Owen hesitated. I can't believe this is all happening. One minute we were planning a family, the next she disappears. It doesn't seem real. Emmett nodded sadly. With any luck, you'll have some answers soon. Soon? Owen scoffed. And what do I do in the meantime? I can't sleep. I can't eat. I mean, how do I handle this? Do I drive around looking for her? Should I go into work and pretend everything is okay? Do I sit at home by the door and wait for her to walk back in? Emmett cringed. He had no answers. What would make you feel best? I suppose just keeping busy. Owen shrugged. I have parent-teacher interviews tomorrow night, so I guess I'll go back into work. He paused, his composure threatening to break. But I'm just so terrified that something bad has happened. I understand, Emmett nodded, hearing himself deliver several useless platitudes. Thankfully, they were interrupted by a lithe figure appearing at their table. This is Detective Jackie Cruz. She's very experienced at missing persons cases. You'll be in great hands. Emmett stood up. And this is Owen Peters. He's actually a teacher at my son's school. Owen mumbled a greeting of sorts, shaking hands nervously. When the teacher seemed settled with the new detective, Emmett excused himself. Please don't hesitate to call me if you need anything. He smiled at Owen, before hurrying out of the cafe and back inside the glass entrance of the police headquarters. He nodded to a guard as he passed through the security gates and made his way to the rear elevators. He and his small team were in the middle of a double murder investigation. And, as bad as he felt about it, he had to put Owen Peters and his missing girlfriend out of his mind. Okay, what have we got on Daniel Norman? Emmett found Bianca and Ted in the conference room, surrounded by paperwork. How's it all looking? Not good, Ted answered glumly. There's no unusual activity in his bank accounts, no records of property ownership, no matching DNA on the jewellery, and we have absolutely no reason to place him in St. Kilda on the Saturday night that his sister was killed. Nothing at all? Emmett dumped his bag on a spare chair. No. We've been on the phone with neighbours to see if anyone remembers seeing him coming or going that day, but it hasn't produced much. And neither has my search through the nursing home staff records, Bianca muttered. I've gone over both permanent and temporary workers, and the background checks haven't revealed any prior criminal histories. Right. Emmett looked at the folders piled on the table. What was he missing? From the whiteboard behind him, he could sense the dead women looking at him, their bright eyes watching every move. There is some good news, Ted continued. The autopsy results for Natalie Gibson have come through. The time of death has been put between 3:30 p.m. and 5:30 p.m. on Friday, July 19th. Like Rosemary, the cause of death has been identified as strangulation. She has the same uneven markings around her neck. The steel wire that's not perfectly flat, Emmett murmured, shaking his head. Exactly. And the same thing with the cuts on her body. Post-mortem injuries that didn't actually contribute to her death. Did the killer clean up with bleach again? Traces of hypochlorite were found on the victim's body, Ted read from his notes. Well, that's something. Emmett rested a hand on the table. So we know the two victims had both recently visited the nursing home in Flemington, and we know that pieces of their jewellery turned up in Tom Norman's bedside drawer. If it wasn't impossible, we'd say the killer was Tom. But if it's not Tom... His colleagues shifted in their seats, as though waiting for the big reveal. Emmett tapped his forehead. He had nothing. It had to be Daniel, didn't it? That footage from the nursing home sounds promising, Bianca prompted. Footage? Emmett hesitated, before remembering seeing a message come through from Stephen, while he'd been downstairs sitting with Owen Peters. Oh, yes. Tell me about that. Apparently there's security vision of an unknown man visiting Tom on July 10th, at the same time that Rosemary Norman was there. They're seen together? Emmett felt his chest pound. Well, no, but Carter tells me he watched this man enter Tom's room just a little after Ms. Norman had gone in, and then she leaves alone, so we can assume the two had some sort of interaction. Okay. This man then returns to the nursing home on the morning of July 16th, and is seen having a lengthy conversation with a female carer in the courtyard. Don't tell me. Emmett's pulse was now racing. Natalie? It appears that way, Bianca nodded. Management have identified Ms. Gibson as being the carer in the footage. But that's not even the best bit. Carter found vision of the same man returning to the nursing home just 3 days ago. This past Thursday? Emmett's mind was working furiously. He'd visited Tom only a day earlier, when he'd first noticed the wooden bracelet left in the drawer. He came back to leave Natalie's necklace. It's certainly a possibility. But no one at the nursing home knows who he is. Carter and Williams are on their way back now, so we'll be able to run his image through our database. We've also kept Daniel Norman in custody, in the hope he may recognise the man. Otherwise, you might want to consider releasing the vision to the public, Ted added. Emmett bit his lower lip. Let's wait to see what leads we can establish ourselves first. I don't want to risk our killer going into hiding, unless we absolutely have to. Yes, that's my concern too, Bianca nodded. And is it worth getting Brian Gibson or Natalie's parents to view the footage as well? If this is someone Natalie knew, he may be related to the family. Good idea. Emmett fiddled with his phone, distracted by a message that had popped up on his screen. He stared at it, panic rising. Something wrong? Bianca tapped him on the arm. Emmett forced his face to relax, a nervous chuckle escaping from his lips. It's probably nothing. He looked from one homicide detective to the other. I've just got a message from a school parent saying Nicholas hasn't been picked up from a playdate. Apparently, Cindy was meant to collect him a few hours ago, but she hasn't showed up and they can't get onto her. They seem a bit worried. Go. Bianca's expression was grim. But we're finally making progress, and I'm sure my wife's just running late. Emmett's words were not convincing, even to him. We're perfectly capable of handling things here, Bianca insisted. Just go.